The Mahabharata and the nuclear war claim. Do all cultures tell the same story of nuclear war? We are delving deep into the hazy boundaries of human memory, where something lies that is far more than just an epic. This is something the world was forced to forget. The Mahabharata is not merely an epic poem of kings, gods, and morality. It is perhaps a record of reality itself, obscured by the dust of millennia, distorted, buried within mythology. When you read it, a shiver runs down your spine. Because the narratives do not feel like the simple product of a human imagination. They are far too specific, far too technical, and far too familiar. Imagine a war. But not an ordinary war. A blinding fireball rises over the battlefield. It is like the sun has descended to earth. The light is so powerful it instantly turns night into day, erasing all shadows. What follows is a wave of heat that incinerates everything in its path. This is no ordinary flame. It is a heat so intense that it vaporizes chariots, elephants and horses, even armed soldiers in an instant, leaving only their shadows etched onto the stones. This stands as an eerie echo millennia old, of the shadow imprints we witnessed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The texts name this terrible weapon, the Brahmastra. The events following its launch resemble a clinical depiction of a nuclear explosion. Strange and horrifying changes are observed in the victims. Suddenly, their hair and nails begin to fall out. This is a classic symptom of acute radiation syndrome. Food becomes poisoned for no apparent reason. Could this be a metaphorical description of nuclear fallout contaminating the air, water, and soil, scattering an invisible death? Animals and humans begin to be born in abnormal, deformed shapes. Genetic mutation. The long-term effects of radiation. And it is not just people who are affected by this divine wrath. The very land is cursed. The texts speak of the regions where these fiery weapons were used becoming barren, infertile, and uninhabitable for decades. The earth transforms into a death zone where no seed would sprout and no living being dared to set foot. Is this not an ancient depiction of the radioactive lands left behind after a nuclear explosion, of Chernobyl's abandoned exclusion zone? It is as if the authors of the text were struggling to describe, to make sense of, a phenomenon whose effects, long-term ecological devastation, they were trying to convey to us. And what of the vehicles needed to carry and launch such immense power? This is where the Vimanas enter the picture. These are not simple flying carpets or magical chariots as described in legends. They are vessels capable of breaking the sound barrier, circumnavigating the globe, performing complex maneuvers, sometimes becoming invisible, and most importantly, carrying and launching these terrible weapons. The passages describing them read less like myth and more like an engineering manual, speaking of a mechanical technology, mastery of aerodynamic principles, and the use of fuel and engine systems. Batteries, liquid metals like mercury, energy sources. These terms are no different from the technical descriptions of an aircraft or spacecraft. At this point, the mind inevitably leaps forward a few thousand years to the 20th century. Atomic bombs detonating over Japanese cities. B-29 bombers. And the aftermath: instant vaporization, radiation sickness, genetic damage, soil contamination lasting for years. Two pictures, from different eras, stare at each other with incredible parallelism. This is far beyond mere coincidence. It is a disturbing resonance. Did humanity in 1945, unknowingly, rediscover a much more ancient and forgotten nightmare for itself? Or is this the common and terrible end that humanity inevitably reaches when it attains the pinnacle of destructive power? These questions lead us to questions far deeper than answers. If this was a nuclear war, who were the sides? How did they possess this technology? And most importantly, what was the fate of those ancient people who wielded this terrible power, perhaps leveling their own civilization in the process? Perhaps their story holds a chilling mirror to our own future. This is not just a mystery of the past, but also a prophecy of a potential future. And we are on the verge of deciphering the meaning of this prophecy. But where are the tangible traces of this terrible destruction? Are they hidden only within the yellowed pages of ancient texts? Or are there evidences buried in the depths of the earth, desperately resisting our attempts to ignore them? The answer perhaps lies in the arid lands of India, in the heart of the Indus Valley. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. These two great, highly advanced ancient metropolises with impeccable urban planning present us with one of history's greatest archaeological mysteries: a sudden and complete collapse. Go to Mohenjo-Daro, the Mound of the Dead. There, you will encounter a scene far beyond an ordinary archaeological layer, an eerie spectacle. The streets seem as if they were sealed, in a single day, by a curse. But the most striking findings are the skeletons. The corpses were found in such a state that it cannot be explained by a traditional war or invasion scenario. The skeletons lie in the streets, inside houses, even on staircases, as if struck down by a sudden, instantaneous death. Some are found holding hands, as if clinging to each other in their final moments even while trying to flee. There are no signs of battle wounds, swords, or arrows on them. Death came invisibly and suddenly. Even more surprising are the claims of the Soviet scientist Alexander Gorbovsky in the 1960s. Gorbovsky suggested that the levels of radioactivity in some of the skeletons here were far above normal. There is talk of vitrified stone fragments, thought to be the result of a fiery explosion, and piles of bricks that melted and fused together. Melting bricks requires temperatures between 1,400 degrees Celsius and 1,500 degrees Celsius. This points to a heat source far more intense and focused than an ordinary fire or even a lightning strike. Just as desert sand transforms into a green glass called trinitite from the heat of a nuclear explosion, could the stones of Mohenjo-Daro have been victims of a similar catastrophe? The archaeological layers show a pattern of destruction in a central area of the city, as if something exploded outward from a central point. This is not the random devastation caused by an earthquake or flood, but rather a focused area of annihilation created by a single, massive release of energy. And what of the mechanisms that launched this energy? The Vimanas. Ancient texts about them, like the technical treatise Samarangana Sutradhara, contain details that are not just poetic descriptions, but read almost like a user manual. The texts speak of the Vimanas, mercury-fed engines. Mercury, an element researched in modern rocket engineering, ion propulsion systems, and even some nuclear reactor designs. The ancient texts state that beneath this mercury-filled chamber was a controllable fire. This fire would heat the mercury and from it derive a power, a propulsive force to lift the machine. Could this be a primitive depiction of a jet engine or a nuclear thermal propulsion system? There is mention of exceeding the speed of sound, vertical takeoff and landing, even becoming invisible. What is this if not a mythological narration of the electronic countermeasures, the radar deception systems used by fighter pilots for stealth? Another line of evidence is hidden in geography. In India's Maharashtra region, there is a circular, perfect crater lake called Lonar Lake. Scientists long believed it was formed by a meteor impact. However, subsequent research revealed the absence of trace elements around the lake that should be present from a meteorite impact. This led to speculation that the source of the impact came from within. Could this crater be the remnant not of a striking meteor, but of a Brahmastra striking the earth, of a nuclear warhead impacting the ground? The rocks around the lake are strangely vitrified and exhibit magnetic properties, an indicator of exposure to sudden, intense heat. As the pieces of this puzzle come together, the picture becomes increasingly clear and equally terrifying. This was not just a war, it was a civilization's self-inflicted end. Perhaps the Kurukshetra war described in the Mahabharata was just one front, the final and greatest battle of this global conflict. On other fronts, on other continents, similar devastations occurred. Cities were wiped off the map, lands were cursed. Could this be the real reason, beyond mythology, for a worldwide Bronze Age collapse? During that period, great civilizations all over the world, the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, the Egyptians, experienced similarly sudden and violent collapses around the same time. Historians have tried to explain this with invasions by sea peoples, climate change, or civil wars. But what if the cause was far more complex and horrifying? What if this collapse was the result of a nuclear war that transcended borders, ravaging the world, fought between rival powers possessing this advanced technology? This thought overturns everything we think we know about human history. Is the era we call prehistory actually the rubble of a history we do not know, that we have forgotten? The pyramids of the Giza Plateau, the giant statues of Easter Island, the perfect stonework of Tiwanaku, are these the surviving fragments of the previous cycle, of that ancient and advanced civilization that perished? Are we, with our current civilization built upon its ashes, a people without history, about to repeat the same mistake? The Mahabharata may not be just telling us a story. It is a warning, a bell tolling from the past, ringing for the future. And this ring is growing louder and more urgent. Yes, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa stand as silent yet striking witnesses. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. The true mystery lies in the origins of this technology, where it came from, and how it could have been so thoroughly forgotten. At this point, we journey beyond the texts, into the deep labyrinths of oral tradition and symbolism. In the Vedas, the oldest texts of ancient India, there is mention of Vimana Vidya, the science of aeronautics. This was not just about how to fly, but a complex curriculum, a pilot's and engineer's handbook, describing how to construct these vessels, how to operate them in different weather conditions, how to detect enemy Vimanas, and how to defend against them. Later texts like the Vaimanika Shastra offer incredible details: fire-powered electricity generators, propulsion systems using liquid mercury, heat-resistant alloys, even techniques for the aircraft to avoid detection by enemy radar, if such a thing existed then, cloaking techniques. These descriptions read not like a shaman's dream narrative, but like an engineer's technical drawings. Who wrote this knowledge, and how? Are these the result of observation, of practical experience? Was there once traffic in the skies consisting of these vehicles? And were the pilots of these vehicles the beings we call gods? Entities who in fact possessed extremely advanced technology? This question leads us to a common mystery in world mythologies. The weapons and battle scenes described in the Mahabharata find echoes in other ancient texts across the globe. For example, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible. The scripture says, "The Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens." These cities were destroyed suddenly by a fire from the sky. The biblical account mentions Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt. Could this be a calcification, a kind of petrification caused by radiation? Archaeologists have found suddenly vitrified pottery shards and melted stones in ancient settlements near the Dead Sea, which they claim are evidence of a sudden and intense heat blast. It is not limited to the Near East either. In Celtic mythology, Lugh possesses a magical spear, so powerful that when thrown, it covers the sky like a sea of flame and incinerates enemy armies. In Greek mythology, the thunderbolts in Zeus's hand are described not as ordinary lightning, but as more powerful, focused energy weapons. What are these parallel narratives trying to tell us? Are all these cultures witnessing the same terrible event, with different names and heroes, from their own unique perspectives? Are these the echoes of a global, unforgettable trauma, passed down through generations, a common trauma experienced worldwide? And what if the physical evidence of this war is not just underground, but right before our eyes, in places we misinterpret and therefore fail to see? Consider the Giza Plateau in Egypt. The Great Pyramid is conventionally accepted as a pharaoh's tomb. Yet, a mummy was never found inside. Its construction remains a mystery to us even thousands of years later. What if these structures are the surviving remnants of a much more ancient civilization, perhaps a power plant or a communication tower. The granite stones inside the pyramid show slight radioactive properties. The ventilation shafts of the Queen's chamber are claimed to point towards specific star systems. Could this indicate some kind of space connection, the remote transmission of energy? Or the gigantic Moai statues on Easter Island? Conventional archaeology says they were built for ancestor worship. But why? Why transport such massive heavy stone blocks from quarries miles away and erect them with incredible precision? On the heads of the statues are huge hats, pukeyo, made of a different type of stone. Have you ever considered that these hats might be nothing other than a type of energy collector, a kind of antenna? The entire island, located at a strategic point on the Earth's energy lines, perhaps part of the lost continent of Mu, was part of a massive energy grid. The statues were the relay stations of this network, this energy web. Then something happened. A war, a deluge, and the system collapsed. All that remained were the giant stone sentinels on a remote island, gazing silently out to sea, guarding their ancient secrets. This is the greatest mystery. The forgetting. Why has humanity completely erased such an era from its collective memory? Perhaps it is a post-traumatic amnesia, a state of collective shock. The handful of survivors, rising from the ashes of their civilization, buried the terrible reality they experienced within mythology and legends because they could not make sense of it. Perhaps it was a conscious forgetting. To ensure this technology and power would never be grasped again, never be used again. Priests and sages may have passed this knowledge on only to a select, initiated few, in an encoded language of symbols, allowing the rest to forget this truth. We are now trying to decipher these ancient codes. Every piece we find brings us to the threshold of a deeper mystery. This is not just an archaeological curiosity, it is a quest for humanity's origin, purpose, and ultimate destiny. And in this quest, from under every stone, a secret emerges, looking silently back at us, waiting. Perhaps they are waiting for us to remember ourselves. So, how could the traces of such immense power and technology have been so utterly erased? The answer perhaps lies in the most terrifying scenario. This destruction was not only physical, but also geological and climatic. What the Mahabharata and other ancient texts from around the world describe is not just the story of a war, but the death scream of a planet. What happened after the final act of the war fell was the beginning of the true tragedy. The texts speak of the sky being covered with dust, and the sun being darkened for years. This is not just a poetic metaphor, but a perfect depiction of a nuclear winter. The simultaneous or closely timed detonation of dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of Brahmastras must have hurled immense amounts of dust, smoke, and radioactive fallout into the atmosphere. Sunlight could not reach the Earth's surface. Temperatures dropped globally. Agriculture became impossible. Plants died because they could not photosynthesize, followed by the animals that ate them, and finally, humans. This initiated a cycle of global famine and mass extinction. The technology they possessed could not save them. On the contrary, it brought about the end of their entire species and the planet's ecological balance. Are there geological evidences of this global catastrophe? Ice cores, samples taken from ice layers in Greenland and Antarctica, have shown abnormally high levels of plutonium and uranium isotopes in the atmosphere during certain periods of history. Science tends to attribute this to natural cosmic ray bursts. But what if these radioactive remnants are the last residues, trapped in the ice, of a nuclear war that raged across the planet thousands of years ago? Similarly, a thin layer rich in iridium, dated to around 12,000 to 10,000 BC, has been found in sediment layers all over the world. The conventional view says this was caused by a comet or meteor impact. But there is another, disturbing possibility. Could this layer be the global rain of burnt organic matter, molten soil, and radioactive particles created by large-scale nuclear explosions? And what of the depths of the oceans? The legendary lost continents of Mu or Atlantis? Plato writes that Atlantis sank into the depths of the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune, due to violent earthquakes and floods. This description bears incredible similarities to a scenario that could be triggered by a series of violent nuclear explosions. Could energy weapons directed at sensitive points of the Earth's crust have been powerful enough to cause sudden shifts in tectonic plates, massive tsunamis, and the submergence of continents? The massive underwater stone structures found off Yonaguni, Japan, whose origin, natural or artificial, is still debated. Could they be the silent evidence of a lost civilization in the Pacific? Similarly, the vast submerged city discovered via sonar in India's Gulf of Khumbat, could it show that the great flood legends are not just myths, but historical realities etched into our collective memory? What happened to the survivors of this catastrophe? The handful of humans who survived were in no state to carry the accumulation of civilization. The instinct for survival overrode everything else. They became nomadic communities, devoid of technology, struggling to meet basic needs, whom we would call cavemen. But the knowledge did not completely disappear. Priests, sages, or scientists did their utmost to pass on this terrible secret as a warning to the people of the next age. But how? There was no writing, or no resources to sustain writing. So they encoded the knowledge into oral traditions transmitted through initiation, into symbols and mythological stories. The pyramids, Stonehenge, the T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Could all of these be the encoded messages, carved in stone, of an ancient physics and astronomy knowledge, of star maps, and perhaps of a warning? This is the deepest mystery. We are not a people without history, forgetting what came before. We are the descendants of the survivors of a great catastrophe. Our ancestors were those ancient people who could travel to the stars, control the planet's energy, but could not control this power and brought about their own end. Their story holds a mirror up to us. We are now progressing along the same path. We have split the atom. We are going into space. We are developing artificial intelligence. Are we falling into the same trap of the same power, the same ambition, the same hubris? The Mahabharata is not just telling us about the past. It is a rehearsal of our future, a prophecy. And the end of this prophecy lies entirely in our hands. Will we remember a forgotten warning and break the cycle? Or will we play the same game that ended our ancestors, atop their ashes? The past is whispering to the future. Silently. Is anyone listening? So, when all this physical, geological, and mythological evidence comes together, what conclusion awaits us? Perhaps this is the most disturbing question. If such an advanced civilization truly existed and destroyed itself, what remains of them for us, for this age? The answer, perhaps, lies in the most unexpected place, hidden in the deepest layers of the human mind and spirit. For thousands of years, esoteric schools, secret societies, and mystical traditions all over the world have spoken of ancient wisdom. These are not just spiritual teachings, but they point to an extremely sophisticated understanding of the workings of the universe, the nature of energy. The yogis in India knew how to work with the bioelectric system of the human body through the energy centers they called chakras. Taoist masters developed ways to manipulate qi, or life force energy. Could this be a personal and spiritual remnant of our ancient ancestors' science of controlling energy? While they used energy externally in massive machines and weapons, did the survivors and their followers internalize this knowledge, transforming it into a system for the individual to work on their own body and consciousness? Perhaps the awakening of Kundalini is a metaphor for a kind of personal, internal nuclear reaction. Some of this knowledge was preserved not only in the East, but all over the world. The Hermetic teachings of Egypt emphasized the principle, as above, so below. Was this a spiritual expression of a unified field theory, describing the connection between the macrocosm and the microcosm? The alchemists spoke of turning lead into gold. This was not just a material transformation, but perhaps a symbolic narrative of the transformation of human consciousness from a base level, lead, to an enlightened level, gold. And the key to this transformation was the philosopher's stone. Was this stone not a physical object, but a distorted memory of a technology used by our lost ancestors, a kind of energy concentrator that manipulated matter and energy? And what of our dreams? Our collective unconscious? Carl Jung spoke of a layer in the depths of humanity, shared by all people, where myths, images, and archetypes are stored. One of these archetypes is the Great Catastrophe. The flood, destruction by fire, the war of the gods. Are these not just our fears, but the traces of a real historical trauma transmitted to us through our genes from our ancestors? Why do children all over the world draw fireballs from the sky and massive explosions? Is this just innocent imagination, or the last image of a previous cycle, etched into the depths of our memory? Perhaps the most tangible remnant is hidden in our language and units of measurement. Is the startling similarity between the English word nuke, nuclear weapon, and the Sanskrit word anuka, tiny particle, a coincidence? Or the fact that many ancient units of measurement around the world align with incredible accuracy to astronomical realities like the Earth's circumference or the distance to the Sun? How did they obtain this knowledge without an advanced understanding of astronomy and mathematics? Were they primitive cavemen as we are taught, or are these measurements a legacy left from the standards of a previous civilization, which we are only rediscovering? And finally, perhaps the greatest evidence is an instinctual fear we possess. Why does the term nuclear weapon evoke such a deep, existential dread? We have never seen a nuclear explosion. But in our dreams, our myths, our art, this fear is repeated over and over. Is this a genetic memory left to us by our ancestors? Just as an animal is born with an innate fear of a predator, are we born with a collective, hereditary fear of that which brought us to the brink of extinction millennia ago? This is not the final stop of our search, but perhaps a new starting point. The past is not just bones and stones. It is etched into the fabric of our consciousness, our language, our dreams, and our deepest fears. The message of our ancient ancestors is not only on stone tablets, it is hidden within us, within each one of us. They are trying to tell us that power cannot be separated from knowledge, and that knowledge, without wisdom and responsibility, only means digging our own grave. Their story is a warning. Technology can advance, but human nature does not change. To avoid repeating the same mistakes, we need to look not only to the stars, but inward, into the dark and forgotten corners of our own collective memory. There, if not answers, we may perhaps find the final warning we need to survive. Because history loves to repeat itself. First as tragedy, then as farce, and then tragedy again. This time, breaking the cycle is in our hands. Or waiting to become another myth for the next civilization to unearth.